Jacob Ludwig Grimm and Wilhelm Karl Grimm were born on January 4, 1785 and February 24, 1786, respectively, in Hanau, near Frankfurt, Hesse. They were the first of 9 children, of whom only 6 survived. Their childhoods were spent in the idyllic countryside. The Grimms lived near the princely mansion from 1790 to 1796, as their father was employed by the Prince of Hesse. When Jacob, the eldest son, was 11, their father, Philip Wilhelm, died, forcing the family to move to a small, cramped house in the city. 2 years later, their grandfather died, leaving their mother alone to earn a living and raise the children. It has been argued that this may be one reason why the Brothers Grimm often spared the father, while female tyrants often played a prominent role in their stories. Like the wicked stepmother and the 2 sisters in Cinderella, but critics forget that the Brothers Grimm were merely collectors of fairy tales, not writers. The Brothers Grimm were educated at the Friedrich Gymnasium in Kassel and later studied law at the University of Marburg. It was here, inspired by Friedrich von Savigny, that the brothers began to develop an interest in the past. They were only in their early 20s when they began studying linguistics, formulating the Grimm's laws, and collecting fairy tales and folk tales from various places, which later became their most famous works. In fact, these collections of fairy tales were a byproduct of their linguistic studies, which was their true goal. In 1808, Jacob is recorded as a court librarian to the King of Westphalia. In 1812, the Brothers Grimm published their first collection of fairy tales, Tales of Children and the Home, which they collected from peasants. Some of the stories contradicted the sources of other stories published in other cultures and languages, such as Charles Perrault. The Brothers Grimm divided their work. Jacob focused on research, while Wilhelm pieced together the stories, recomposed them into literary form and described them as children's stories. The brothers also took an interest in folklore and the history of literary origins. In 1816, Jacob became a librarian in Kassel, and Wilhelm also worked there. Between 1816 and 1818, they published 2 volumes of German legends and a volume of early literature. As the Brothers Grimm became interested in ancient languages and their relationship to German, Jacob began to study the history and structure of the German language in detail. They later summarized the relationships between words, which they called Grimm's laws, and collected a large amount of raw data. In 1830, after establishing stable jobs in the city, they bought a house in Göttingen. Jacob became a professor and became chief librarian in 1830, while Wilhelm became professor in 1835. In 1837, the Brothers Grimm, along with 5 fellow professors at the University of Göttingen, protested against King Ernest Augustus I's revocation of the Constitution of the State of Hanover. This group of protesters later became known as Die Göttinger Sieben. All were expelled from the university, and 3 were exiled, including Jacob. Jacob fled to Kassel, outside Ernest's territory. Wilhelm later joined them, staying with their brother Ludwig. The following year, the King of Prussia invited them to live in Berlin, and they moved there ever since. The latter part of their lives was devoted to the compilation of a German dictionary, the first of which was published in 1854, and became the basis for the development of various versions. Jacob remained a bachelor for the rest of his life. Wilhelm married Henriette Dorothea Wild, sometimes called Dorchen, in 1825. She was the daughter of a pharmacist who had been friends with the Grimm family since childhood, where the brothers first heard the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Wilhelm had 4 children, one of whom died in infancy, but the 2 sisters remained close even after Wilhelm married. Wilhelm died in Berlin on December 16, 1859. Jacob continued to work on the dictionary and other related projects until his death in Berlin, also on September 20, 1863. They were buried in the St. Matthias Kirchhof Cemetery in Schönberg, Berlin. The Brothers Grimm spread democratic ideas widely in Germany and are revered as influential figures in the democratic movement in Germany, which led to the Prussian Revolution of 1848-49 and the establishment of a constitutional monarchy. Grimm's fairy tales arose from the deep interest in language, grammar, and history of the German brothers Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Their fairy tales were compiled from oral tradition and were first published in 1812 under the title Children's and Household Tales, which in English is often called Grimm's Fairy Tales. At first, it received little critical acclaim, as the stories were not as beautiful and sweet as those we read today. However, the stories were later refined to make them more readable, and when they were translated into other languages, there were also cuts. Some of the content that is sensitive or violent has been removed. The tales of the Brothers Grimm are rich in imagination, including magic, small elves, giants, animals that turn into people, and people who can transform into animals. They also like to start with the phrase "once upon a time." Well-known stories include Snow White, Cinderella, Rapunzel, Sleeping Beauty, and Little Red Riding Hood. Throughout their lives, they worked closely together. Even when signing contracts, they still used the joint name the Brothers Grimm. In addition to creating popular fairy tales, they were also scholars of ancient languages, professors, librarians, and influential figures in the movement for democracy in Germany. Although the Brothers Grimm have passed away, their works continue to live on to this day.